Just something that's not small for you.
How much do you go for it?
Sure.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Welcome everybody to In Air's Kitchen. I think this is episode 17. And if it's your first time tuning in, you'll be able to follow along. We're working in this show with really basic staples that we are hoping people have in their kitchens. And we're also trying to use really straightforward techniques, so you should be able to follow along with this recipe. That said, we are building on some of the skills. So we're going to, for example, we're going to be setting up a pizza dough today for tomorrow, an overnight pizza dough, which is a little more complicated version of something we did last Friday where we made a super fast pizza dough. So if you haven't yet done last Friday's pizza dough, you might want to try that before you try this pizza dough. Should we get started with everything else? All right. So we're going to do overnight oats. This is an item we've had on the menu at Clover for a while. I love the overnight oats. I have that at least once a week. It's really yummy. We usually serve it with some nut butter and some bananas on top of it. It's really delicious. So I'm going to show you guys how to make that. The fun thing about this is you don't have to cook anything in the morning. So you set this up in the fridge, and it's the overnight part. And then in the morning, you've got breakfast ready to go. And then we're also going to do a little bonus. Blue thinks we need almond butter in here too. We're not going to use that till tomorrow though. We got to wait till the morning. Overnight pizza dough. So we're going to do a little more sophisticated pizza dough than what we did last week. And we're sort of working ourselves up this mountain toward a naturally fermented whole wheat pizza dough. So we started last week with a super fast pizza dough. This week is all white. Last week's was yeast and all white flour and very fast. This one is yeast and white flour, but slower. We're going to let it take some time and it'll develop more flavor. And then next week we're going to do a different pizza dough. That one we're going to do it with a sourdough starter, which will be a lot of fun. And that one will still be mostly white flour. And then we'll work to a place where we get mostly whole wheat flour. So we'll have a lot of fun with all of those things. So that's what we have ahead. I'm going to go through the ingredients you're going to need if you want to follow along. Most important thing for the overnight oats is having some oats. So these are from Main Grains. Main Grains is a wonderful company if you don't know about them already. Clover buys lots of different things from Main Grains. They sell beans is a new product they have, but they've really been focused as a mission on helping build grain shed in the Northeast. So they've been focused on selling fresh milled wheat berries, so fresh wheat. And we have a wheat grinder here, so we tend to grind our own flour. We'll do that a little bit later today. But if you don't have a grinder, and you can buy wheat berries from Main Grain as well, but if you don't have a grinder, they're a wonderful source of flour. And you can order from them online. We'll put the links to order from Main Grains. They are really wonderful partners to Clover. We feel really bad we can't be sending them orders right now, but the best thing we can do is direct some of you guys to order from them directly. What they do is wonderful and really creating a better New England for all of us that live around here. So they also have rolled oats. This is what we use at Clover for our oats as well. So we have organic rolled oats. that one's critical. You really can't do this without that. We have some basics you should have, some salt, water. I have here Macadamian nuts. At Clover, we make a Macadamian Nut Milk that we soak the oats in. It's really yummy this way. If you don't have macadamia nuts, you could do this with a different kind of nut. Hazelnuts, pecans, walnuts, almonds. If you don't want to do nut milk, you could also use dairy milk. So that's another alternative. But we're going to go through making a macadamia nut milk today. We have some sugar we're going to use to sweeten it, and we have chia seeds here. This is a little trick. When we were working on the overnight oats at Clover, overnight oats have been a popular item among healthier eaters for a long time, and I think they're sort of an evolution of muesli. And on the West Coast, there's a lot of overnight oats available and have been for a while. And it was something we started thinking about for Clover 4 or 5 years ago. I think even at this point, I don't know of many places in Boston that have overnight oats, or if they do, they may have been influenced by us. So for Boston, it's a little bit novel, but for the rest of the country, I think, or at least other parts of the world, maybe less novel. But when we were, it's usually more of like a health foody kind of thing, and so I think people overlook some aspects of it that aren't as delicious. And I've always liked overnight oats, but I think there's a lot of like a birdseedy quality to them. And we were working with different recipe ideas to try to get away from that. We wanted something that felt really nice in your mouth. And this was the secret ingredient. We ended up adding some chia seeds, not a lot, and I think someone was playing with chia puddings at the same time, but we just added a few chia seeds, and they're a background note, but they swell up and they create a different texture overall, and they get you out of that birdseed kind of texture zone into something that's a lot more satisfying. So if you've had overnight oats at Clover, you may not even know it, but that's one of the little secrets that we've included in that recipe. So we're going to make this today, and those are the ingredients you're going to need to follow along. This is for when we serve it to ourselves in the morning, and bananas are great, cranberries are great, you can put jam on it, you can put pecans on it, there's a lot of different choices once you get to the morning. And then the other thing we're going to make today is we're going to make pizza dough. And this is very simple in terms of what we need. You're going to need some flour. I've got two different kinds of flour here. This is just white bread flour, and this is an Italian flour. That's a 00 flour. That refers to how finely it was milled. And I have yeast here. So this is SAF-T. It's SAF T yeast. And I like this yeast a lot. It's commonly used in commercial settings, but you can get a hold of it. You probably order it online, or you can get it from some grocery stores. But if you don't have this, Fleischmann's yeast, some sort of instant yeast will work just fine for this recipe. And we get water, and we're going to borrow some salt. And that's all we're really going to need for making, we're going to need some olive oil. You want to grab the olive oil, Blue? And that's all we're going to need to make the pizza dough. So it's very simple dough. And if you didn't have the olive oil, you'd be okay too. But it does add a little bit of fat to the dough, and it'll help with the texture. So these are the ingredients we're going to use today. And if you want to follow along, these are the things you should gather on. All right, should we get started, guys?
Yes.
I thought we would start with the dough, and we'll come back to the overnight oats, and then we'll finish up the dough at the end. So the recipe we're using for the dough today is very, very similar to the recipe we used last week. So you'll recognize some of these measurements. We're using 3 cups of flour. We're using 1 1/3 cups of water. So and we're using just a little bit less water than we used last week. We're using a 1/2 teaspoon of yeast. I put a star there, or maybe Brooke drew a star there coincidentally, but this one is important because it's different than what we were doing before. So we did 2 teaspoons of yeast when we were trying to push this really fast and get it to just create bubbles as fast as possible. That last week, if you weren't around, on Friday, we put an order in for pizza for delivery, and then we raced it. We started making dough. We made pizza, we baked the pizza, we took it out, and we took some bites of it before the delivery even arrived. So in that case, we were trying to go as fast as possible. In this case, we're going to take time. We want it to go overnight, so we're going to put less yeast in there. 1 tablespoon of olive oil and a teaspoon of salt. So this recipe is very, very similar to last week's recipe. The big change here is the yeast. And And so the way that we're going to do this today, and last week I think we just used measuring spoons. Do you remember? Is that what we did? I think that's what we did. Well, this week we're going to use a scale. As we do more and more baking on the show, we're going to use scales a lot. And we're going to generally talk about things in grams. So you'll want a scale, kitchen scale you can use that can measure in grams. This one is one I like a lot. I've had this, I think I've gone through a couple of these, I've broken some. But it's like $15 or something like that. It's not a very expensive scale. This newest one has a little metal cap. The old ones didn't. But it's just plastic. But it works pretty well, and it doesn't cost very much. And I like this one a lot. Any kitchen scale you have will work fine. Any scale you have will work fine as long as you can just measure things in grams and you can tare. So I'm going to put the bowl on there, and this bowl's a little bit large, and I'm going to hit the tare button. It's going to tare it out to 0. And then the way I'm going to get started with this recipe then is I'm going to put my flour in. I want 500 grams, and we're going to make 2 batches of this today. I want to show you how to make this by hand and also with the mixer. There you go. All right, so that's 500 grams of flour. And now, you want to grab the salt there, Bloom?
Yes. Here you go.
Okay. And now the salt, we're going to want 1 teaspoon of salt. I didn't write down the weight there, but I think this is going to be about 5 grams of salt. Perfect. All right. Sorry, I skipped you. And now we're going to add, all right, there we go. And now we're going to add some water, and we're going to add some yeast. So I'm going to tare this out, and the amount of water I want is 375 grams of water. Now, last week we made sure the water was really hot. This week I don't need the water to be hot, because we're actually going to purposely retard the development of this dough. That means we're going to keep it cold so it doesn't go very fast. So we've got 175 grams on the nose there. I'm going to tare that again. And now let's put some yeast in. So 1/2 of a teaspoon of yeast. You want to do that one, Violet?
Sure.
We'll just drop the yeast right in that water. And then Blue, we need a tablespoon of olive oil. So you want to do that after?
How much?
1 tablespoon. If I put down the weight measurements on those, it would even be faster, as you can see. Half a teaspoon of yeast, yeah. Yeah, we're not used to cooking by weight in kitchens, but I think that it's a wonderful way to cook. You get a lot more accuracy. Put it right in there. Good job. Okay, and a tablespoon of olive oil. You get a lot of accuracy, and you can actually speed up the cooking process. It makes it a lot easier for me to tell you what to use at home, because depending on how your flour is packed, it might be more dense or less dense. The kids and I have been talking about density. 1 tablespoon of olive oil. Yeah. We've been talking a little bit about density and how, in measuring, you can take a cup of flour and it weighs one thing, and then you fluff it all up, and then you measure it again, and it weighs another thing. So scales help us neutralize those effects. There you go. Tablespoon of olive oil. Nice job, Blue. Okay, so we've got our flour, we've got water, yeast, olive oil, and salt, and that's all that's going to go in this recipe. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour that in. And now I'm going to use my hands, which are clean. I washed them right before we got started. And I'm going to incorporate this, mix it together. And Blue, you want to grab the mixer bowl there?
Yes.
What I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to get these ingredients mixed together nicely, so incorporated. And what we're going to do then is we're going to let this sit for a half hour before we play with it much more. But I just want to get to a place where these ingredients are nicely mixed before that. Okay. And there are different ideas about when to add the salt. Some people also like a saltier pizza dough. So some people, for the same amount of dough, would probably do 1 or 2 tablespoons of salt. This is 1 teaspoon of salt. I think this is a nice You can taste it. I think it's like a nice saltiness level, but there are a lot of doughs that go much more salty. Some of the pizza places I really like end up doing really salty doughs, but I think this is about where we'll be. Okay, so blue, we're going to just do this whole recipe over again, the exact same thing, but we're going to do it in the mixer so people can see how a mixer works if you have one of those at home. So, also that's going to give us some extra dough to play with tomorrow because I'd like to get some of this started before the show starts so you guys can see it in some different stages. Alright, so I don't know if this bowl's too heavy for the scale, let's try it. Let's see. Yeah, so far so good. Okay. So, do you want to use the other flour?
Sure.
You want to see how that one is? All right, let's see how much of that we've got. Go ahead and pour that in.
All of it?
Yeah, all of it. Just dump.
Are there any benefits of having overnight pizza dough than the fast quick one?
You know, Blue, you ask really good questions. I should even, before the show, I should tell you the questions to ask, but I don't even have to, do I? Here, yeah, there are. And this is just a little bit over. Actually, we can do a little math. We won't get there yet. We'll get to percentages and stuff later. But right now, I'm just going to pull a bit of this flour off. We're a little bit over. So why would you make the dough overnight instead of making it that super fast way? That super fast dough is an awesome option when you're really hungry, or your kids are really hungry, or everybody's really hungry, and you would like something quick. But you want to be able to control what the ingredients are, and maybe you want something that tastes a little bit better than the pizza that you can get in delivery. That would be the reason to do the really fast one. The slower pizza dough is going to have more flavor. So, and the texture might be a little more fun. Like, this texture might be a little chewier in our mouths. And that's going to happen because we're letting the yeast and bacteria, mostly yeast in this case, develop overnight, over a longer period of time. And they're going to go eat stuff and multiply and eat more stuff and multiply, and they're going to change the flavor of the dough by doing that. They're also going to change the gluten structure in the dough by doing that. So that's the main reason. All right, so we're just doing the same exact thing as what we did before. So we've got our flour in there. We're going to go ahead and put some salt in there. That's perfect. All right, we'll put some olive oil in there, Lou.
How much?
1 tablespoon. Half a teaspoon of yeast. You got it. Nice job. Yeah.
I was like,
Nice job. And let's go ahead and get our water measured out. You want to do this water? Okay, so we're going to do 375 grams of water there, Blue. All right, and if anybody has any questions as they're watching us, feel free to post those. We'll take a little break in a minute and check in on any questions you might have.
what was it, 300?
So we want 375. All right, perfect. So we're going to add that in. Now, in the mixer, we're just putting all the ingredients right in this bowl, and we're going to bring this over to the stand mixer here. I'm just showing you these two different ways of doing this in case you have a stand mixer at home. And what we're going to do is put a dough hook on there, which I'm afraid might be in the dishwasher. Okay, so we've got the dough hook here, and then what we're going to do is bring that bowl up, and we're going to turn this on the slow setting, stir, and we're going to let that go for like 3 or 4 minutes. And that's just going to mix everything up similar to what I just did with my hands. It's going to do a great job, it's just going to take a little longer than I did with my hands. And then in both cases, we want to let these doughs sit for about a half hour after they've been mixed. So we're going to let that mix it all the way up and then let it sit for a half hour. All right. So, what's happening with the dough now then is we've mixed all these ingredients together, which is just yeast and flour and water and salt and a little bit of olive oil. And we've mixed them so they're thoroughly mixed. We did one by hand, we're doing another one in a mixer. And then we're letting this sit for a half an hour. And then after we let it sit, we're going to knead it a little bit. And then we're going to put it, we're going to put a nice cloth over it, and we're going to keep it at a cool temperature overnight. And then tomorrow we're going to make it into pizza. So that's the pizza dough. Let's move on to the overnight oats. Does that sound good, guys? So we're going to start by making the nut milk for the overnight oats. We're going to come over to the blender here for this. Now I've got a big black dog I need to straddle in order to do this. It's Snorri and Tulip like to sit like in very awkward places, and I could try to have a negotiation with him right now, but I think I'll just deal with him being there. So so I have here macadamia nuts that have been sitting in water, and the reason I let them sit in water is I'll get more out of them when they've like soaked up that water. So it's just softened them, and it's going to allow more of the fat to be available to us. And I did this recipe that we're doing today is going to be 1 cup. It's going to be 1/3 of a cup of macadamia nuts. And here, I actually did a little bit more than that. This is 1 full cup, but I realized that this might make a little bit too much for people at home. So I think what we're going to do is use 1/3 of this. What do you guys have something you want to tell me?
There's a question, but I'm not.
You're not sure what it is?
I'm not sure what it's.
Sure.
It says, can you please, how do we
do the sourdough starter?
You said we will be doing next week.
Somebody wants to know how to get a sourdough starter. Everybody's getting excited about the sourdough. Yes, we are going to do that next week. We will get started with the starter next week. So we're working our way to that. Now, so we should probably, what I'm probably going to do is just, I'm going to try to take 1/3 of these macadamia nuts just because I think I would like to stick to the recipe I'm going to give you guys. So I just have a full cup of them in there. All right. I just have a full cup of them in there, and I just want to give you a more accurate version of what you're going to be doing at home, and you're going to make a smaller recipe than that, because I think it would end up making too much overnight oats for most people to consume. But you can always scale these recipes any way you like. So this is 1 cup of macadamia nuts, but I'm only going to put 1/3 in. And so there we go. So that's 1/3 of a cup of macadamia nuts. And then we're going to do in this recipe, we're going to put a whole quart of water. So I have a quart jar here, and I'm just going to use that same water the macadamia nuts were in.
Why do we soak them?
Why do we soak them? It softens them up and it makes more creamy nut milk. So I'm going to use 1 quart of water, which you can do with 4 cups at home. And then I'm going to do, we're going to put a little bit of salt in here, and we're going to put a little bit of sugar in here. So we're going to do 1/4 of a cup of vanilla sugar. I don't know if you were watching one of the shows earlier, but a really nice trick with your sugar is if you take a spent vanilla pod, you can see it in there a little bit, and you put that vanilla pod in the sugar, it gives the sugar a little bit of a vanilla taste. And this is a trick we use at Clover when we use vanilla pods for like vanilla soda or something like that. We'll save what's left of the vanilla pod and we'll put it in our sugar, and then we use it for the Macadamian Nut Milk. So I'm using 1/4 of a cup of this vanilla sugar. Okay, and then I need a pinch of salt. You want to grab me some salt, Lou? Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so we got a little bit of sea salt. This is just a little bit of salt in there. And now we're going to make our macadamia nut milk. There's one ingredient that I don't have that we do at Clover, which is we add a very ripe banana into this, and that brings a lot more sweetness to it. It also brings a little bit of body and a little bit of a banana taste. It's a lot of fun. I really, really like that version of this. Without the banana, this is going to be not quite as thick. It's not going to have the banana flavor, and it's also not going to be quite as sweet. So it's just a trade-off because we don't have that right now. Blue, can you stop the mixer over there, bud? Thanks. All right. So I start out at a low setting. I'm listening with my ears. I'm hearing those nuts get broken up a little bit. And sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to move here, buddy. I know he looks dead, but he's really not. All right. I'm going to turn this up a little bit. You can let this go for a little while. It's sort of noisy. So if you have a nut milk bag at home, you could use that at this point. If you don't have a nut milk bag, you could use a strainer. You want to grab me that strainer, Blue? We'll just show people how to do this with the strainer. And basically, the nut milk bag is a little more fine than most strainers, but it just means it will take out a little bit more of the particles. So I'm just going to run this through a strainer. See, you can see it's like a pure white color. Macadamia nuts, I believe can't remember if macadamia nuts or Brazil nuts have more fat in them, but they're a very rich nut, and they make a really yummy nut milk. And these are raw macadamia nuts. The texture will be a little different if you're working with a toasted macadamia nut, but you can make milk from toasted nuts as well. But the raw nut will give you the most creamy texture. The raw nuts in the United States, unless you buy them from a farm, are not all the way raw. They have to heat treat them a little bit to kill off bacteria and stuff like that. It's a FDA requirement. So all those nuts that are labeled raw, unless you're buying from the farm, they're not raw. Okay, so you see this pulp here? That's the stuff I'm using this to remove, and this you could use for different things. A common use for this kind of pulp is it's fiber, so you could add this into like a muffin or something like that. It might be yummy.
It looks like whipped cream.
Yeah, it does. It's not gonna taste like whipped cream. Do you want to taste it?
Sure.
Yeah.
I taste it.
It's gonna be like a little chalky in your mouth, right? Yeah, it doesn't taste as good as it looks, huh?
No.
Yeah.
It's very chalky.
Yeah.
It tastes like a bit more.
Sort of chalky. It doesn't taste bad, it's just sort of chalky, right? Okay, so this is our macadamia nut milk. And fun thing about this recipe is you can get those macadamia nuts soaking in a container. You can use the water that they soak in to make your milk, and then you can go ahead and you can put the milk right back in the container, which is great. And now we're going to mix up the overnight oats, which is a really straightforward process for us here. We're going to do this right in the jar. So we're just going to take a half of a cup of the rolled oats. So here I have rolled oats from Main Grain. All right. And do you want to measure out half a cup of these?
Sure.
Here. That's that one's this one's a half cup measure. There we go. All right, you want to go ahead and put those in there? And then we're going to put in a tablespoon of chia. Oh, we'll just put a little bit more. You just spilled a little bit. That's okay. It's not a super precise recipe. That's fine. And then let's put in, we need a tablespoon of chia seeds. You want to grab a tablespoon of chia seeds?
Tablespoon.
I got you. All right, here you go. Awesome. Tablespoon of chia, put that in there below. And then we need half a teaspoon of salt. Can you get the salt, Violet?
Sure, half a teaspoon.
Half a teaspoon of salt, right here. Get it in the right one, yeah. Excellent. And we still have all these macadamia nuts, so we'll just make up some extra macadamia nut milk today. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
It's pretty, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like an alabaster color.
How does it get so white?
It's just nature of the macadamia nuts. It's, you know, the almonds don't get that white, do they?
Half a teaspoon.
Half a teaspoon.
Can
Yeah,
you
well,
make oat milk?
you want to give me one of these? Can you what?
Yeah, can you make oat milk?
Yes, you can make oat milk, but the oat milk that tastes so delicious from the store, the Oatly and those things, they get sweetener in there that we don't, that we probably wouldn't add. They have ways of processing the oats that they can actually get like sugar out of the oats. All right, so you just gave me a lid, Blue, and you put in the salt as well. All right, so we got oats here, chia seeds, that's all that's in here. It's a pretty simple mix. We're putting a little bit of salt in there too. All right, bingo. And that's that. So this is our overnight oats. Now, what we're gonna do now is we're just gonna fill this up with our Macadamian nut milk. Okay. So this is oats, salt, and chia seeds, and macadamia nut milk. I'm gonna just shake that a couple times. Now, it looks like there is not enough oats in there, but the oats are going to absorb the milk overnight and they're going to expand. And in the morning, we're going to have some nice cereal. So you can see them in the bottom there. But all these ingredients are going to expand. And we're going to just put them in the fridge. Tomorrow morning, we'll pull those out of the refrigerator and we'll have ourselves a little quick breakfast. So, do you guys want to taste the nut milk?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a little, here.
Oh, there's one box on it.
There you go. There you go. Taste it. Clementine, I heard you over there. Do you want to taste this?
I like the sugar on this one. Yeah.
You like the sweetness of it? Yeah, it's even sweeter when it has the bananas in there. When you put the right bananas in, it's got a lot of sweetness.
I like them.
It's yummy, isn't it? Yeah. Alright, we're fans of the Macadamian Nut Milk. That's all you're going to do for overnight oats. In the morning, you can put some peanut butter on those, almond butter. You could put some nuts on them. You could put some dried fruit, some raisins or cranberries or apricots. You could put fresh fruit. You could have chopped up apples. You could put bananas on there. Bananas and peanut butter are really yummy. You could put chocolate chips on there. Blue's thinking. So you can have whatever you really like as a topping. I think a lot of the toppings that work really well in oatmeal work really well in overnight oats as well. Let's get back to the pizza dough and spend another minute or two on that. So, Blue, would you do me a favor and grab me a spatula or a scraper from under there?
Spatula. What is the spatula?
You know that in the dishwasher, you think?
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah, maybe just grab me a spoon, a wooden spoon. That'll work fine. All right. So what I needed this for is I'm coming over here to the mixer, and I just want to make sure that all of the flour and dough that's going to get stuck on the bottom side and the sides of this mixer, I just want to make sure it's all going to be included. So I'm just using that to make sure everything's in there. We don't want any like dry clumps being left behind. Now at this point, we ran this for a couple minutes to mix it all up, and then we stopped it to let it sit. And we let it sit for about 20-30 minutes, and then now we're going to come back to it and knead it. So this is going to be the next step. And what we're going to do is just get this guy going. We're going to bring the speed up just a little bit. We start out at lowest setting. Now we're going to go a little bit higher setting, and we're going to let that knead. And while that's kneading over there, we're going to knead our dough up over here. Okay? So we're going to come over here and knead this dough. So this is the dough we just mixed it together, got all the ingredients together, and and you can see what it looks like now. We've given it some time to soak, and it's going to be a little bit sticky, and that's fine. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of a kneading, and I don't need to do a lot right now. I'm going to do a little bit more than that. Get some of the sticky dough off my hands. My hands are wet again. It lets me handle it without getting it all stuck on me. And now what's going to happen with this dough at this point, and we'll go over this tomorrow, but if you want to follow along at home and get yourself some dough starter because you want to have some pizza on Friday night, you're going to set this up, and then at some point tomorrow, we're going to set this up in some cool place. So we're going to put this either in our basement or we're going to put this in the refrigerator. And then at some point tomorrow, about 2 hours before we want to eat pizza, we're going to bring this to a place that has room temperature, and we're going to let it. We're going to take the dough at that point, and we're just going to bring this dough, fold it in on itself like that, and it will be fluffier at that point. We're going to just fold it in on itself, and then we're going to let it sit like this with a rag on it for 2 hours. And tomorrow when we come back, I'll show you the dough that just came out of the refrigerator, so you can see what that looks like. And I'll also have some dough that's been sitting for 2 hours, so you'll see what that looks like. It's not exactly 2 hours depending on where you are. So if you have a warmer house, it might go faster. If you have a colder house, it might go less quickly. But what's going to happen over that period and how you're going to know when you get there, this will double in size. So we're going to be looking for a doubling in size. So tomorrow, when we take a look at this, we should have one that's about this size, and we should have one that's double the size. The one that's this size is the one that just came out of the fridge. The one that's double the size is the one that's already been sitting at room temperature for 2 hours. Once it gets to that doubled size, that's when we're ready to shape it and make it into pizza dough. So, so that's what's going to happen. And these are just, this pizza dough is going to sit in the fridge overnight. The other one is as well. Let's go take a peek at that other dough. All right. And actually, Blue, if you want to just wash that off and then put a little olive oil in there, that'd be nice. All right, so we're going to look at this dough with the mixer here. And so the mixer's just been kneading the dough. It's doing a similar thing to what we were doing by hand. I'll show you, it's looking a little different than it was before. The dough's been climbing up on that hook a little bit. It has more shape and texture to it. I'm going to reach in there and just mix it around a little bit because there's still some dry pockets at the bottom I want to get out of there. Okay. And then for this particular dough, I really think that it's just about as fast to do it by hand as it is the mixer. That's not true of all doughs, but for this one, I think it's about the case. And so we're going to go ahead and mix that again. I'm just going to let the dough hook run on it for a little bit. Wash my hands off again. One of these days I've been thinking I should measure how much dough I lose by touching it. Because you, depending on the bread you're making, or you play with it a lot. Pizza dough is really just a form of bread. So you may not know it, but when we're doing these pizzas, we're starting to sort of develop some of the familiarity and some of the muscles and capability to start making bread. All right. So this dough is in a good place right now. I'm going to bring the mixer down, take that out. Nice job, Blue. So I'm going to go ahead and that dough is going to be right there. And a nice thing about this mixer I sort of like is you can take this lid and just put it right on there. And that might be even how this stores. This other dough, this is the one we were playing with earlier. This is the one we did by hand. We're just going to pop that in there. And this is a pretty sticky dough at this point, but that's fine. I'm not worried about that. You want to make sure we have a bowl that's big enough for this to double in size, which this bowl is just about the right size for that. And this will take, we're going to put this at cold temperature so it'll ferment slowly, but it will grow in size. And then we're going to take it out 2 hours before the show tomorrow. And I think we'll take this one out. We'll do one or the other. We'll take it out 2 hours before the show tomorrow, and then when we get on the show tomorrow, first thing is I'll show you the dough that just came out of the refrigerator, what it looks like. And I'll show you the dough that's been out for 2 hours and what that looks like, and then we'll start making some pizza. Thanks everybody for joining. I think that's it. Were there any other questions we missed, Bloom?
No.
All right, so we're quiet day on the questions. Bring any questions you have tomorrow. We're going to be back at 4 o'clock. We're going to be making overnight pizza tomorrow. Thanks for joining us.